And it starts like this. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place. And then in disgrace, you would have to start to take the lower place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Grace, peace, and mercy from God our Father and our risen Savior Jesus Christ. Some of you I keep trying. Some of you know that this past summer, our baby, who is by no means a baby, he's past mid-20s, was living with us because he was doing an internship at Shoemaker in town at the law firm, because he's in law school. And the theory was that, he'd be busy during the week and we'd be kind of busy on Sundays, but maybe Saturday we could see him, or maybe, no, not so much. Because he and his significant other, Becca, both graduated from Capital, and they graduated far enough back that now all of their friends from Capital have said, it's time to get legitimate and get married. So this has been the summer of weddings. And they've been all over the country, every blessed weekend, I think, going to weddings. And at one point I said, these people that you have not seen in 4 whatever years, 5 years, at the bottom of that invitation, there's this place where it says, Respondez s'il vous plaît, and there's a place for regrets. You got an option here, because this is getting really crazy and expensive. You're nuts. And I'm thinking about that because it says right here that Jesus had been invited for a dinner party. And I'm thinking, so why did these people they've not seen in all these years invite them to their wedding? And of course, the first thought is, for presents? Yeah. I don't know. But why did this prominent Pharisee, this leader, this guy he's far enough up that he was not living in a hovel behind the worship space. He's out there in the suburbs. He's got a nice place. And he's throwing up dinner for all these important people, and we're going, and Jesus, in our heads we think Jesus, Pharisees, Not so much, really, because a lot of what we see as Jesus arguing with Pharisees is Jesus and these Pharisees, with whom he identified in many ways, having a Pharisaic discussion, which is a nice way of saying an argument, about what God really intends. And in fact, just before this, some Pharisees have come to Jesus and said, you know, Herod's out for you. You better leave town. So it wasn't as fraught as we sometimes fall into thinking. On the other hand, it was fraught. They were not necessarily close. They just kind of had this. And then, why did Jesus accept? And the short answer is because Jesus always has to accept invitations. That's what Jesus is. That's who Jesus is. When you invite Jesus, Jesus arrives. Same case here. And throughout his ministry, he's been invited to a lot of meals. And some of them have been a little fraught. This will not be the first time that there have been some upsets. But he arrives, and this is the part where I have to point out, did you see the gap in the numbering? We're missing a few verses here. The lectionary does this every once in a while, and they say, don't read that. Don't read that. Well, I'm like the little kid when they said, no, you can't read pages 6 through 8. You leave the room, I'm going to read pages 6 to 8. Of course I am. Well, here's what happened in those missing verses. Remember last week when there was this little problem with healing on the Sabbath? Here we are at another Sabbath. And who is the first person Jesus encounters as he arrives at this house? A man with dropsy. Now, if you're not up on your archaic medical terminology, that's when the body retains fluid and it's not good. These days, the doc would give you a prescription for Lasix, and you'd go to the bathroom a lot, in point of fact, but you'd get rid of the fluid. In those days, you just kept doing it till you died. And there's Jesus, and here we go again, and they're watching him closely. Jesus takes the high road and says, isn't it proper to heal on the Sabbath? Is that okay with you? Silence. Now, maybe it's because they're not sure what they want him to do, but I think more likely the look on their faces probably telegraphed, heck no. Either way, they didn't say anything, and he took that as approval. And he healed the man because that's what Jesus does. He sees someone in need, he stops what he's doing, and he takes care of it. So, Emily Post faux pas number 1. The bell rings for dinner, they go into dinner, and he's watching these people who've been invited to this very important man's house, and they're jostling for position. Kind of like those wedding receptions that the kids kept going to this summer, going into this hall full of people they never met before, never seen before, but they're important to the couple, so it's where do you sit? Well, in these times and in this place, you were only invited because you were useful, and you were only going because it was useful. And so they're jostling for position and probably a little elbow action here and there. And Jesus very wryly says, you might want to think about this. You don't want to be up there at the head table and find out that you are not the best man and have, the embarrassment of being scooted to the back of the hall. Here's an idea. Sit down at the back of the hall and wait to be invited. Because those who take that humble approach will be invited. So, there's Emily Post faux pas number 2. This is starting to sound like the old story with Winston Churchill, which may or may not be true, but it's a good story, where he is at a dinner party with, it might have been Lady Astor, but it was some important woman. And he had a little something to drink. And at one point, this woman who's his dinner partner says, "Sir, you are drunk." And he said, "Ma'am, you are ugly." The thing is, in the morning, I'll be sober. You still gonna be ugly. "Winston, if you were my husband, I'd poison your drink." "If I was your husband, I'd drink it." That's where this party's going. Imagine sitting at that table listening to that exchange. Because this is when Jesus turns on his host and says, "You know all these people you've gathered here? You shouldn't have. These are not the people you should be looking out for. These are not the people, because they're just going to invite you somewhere else, and here you go, quid pro quo, tit for tat. Everybody's looking out for everybody else, and it's all trying to get ourselves elevated somehow." And that is not how this is supposed to work. You're supposed to be looking out for those in need, and in the end, those who do that will be rewarded in heaven. So, Luke very kindly doesn't tell us how this party ends. So we have to kind of use our imagination. I have a feeling that after all of the people wanted to kind of like head for the doors all the way through, probably when Jesus did leave, I'm thinking that probably the host did not smile and say, "Come again." I could be wrong. It's possible. I don't know. But here's the thing. The point he's trying to make is, in the kingdom, these are your choices, and these are the better choices. Jesus only gives us better choices. We can make our own. But this is, I'm subtracting years here. It's been well over a decade. Tommy Campolo had a book, Stories to Warm Your Heart, or something like that. One of the stories was a time when he was in Haiti checking out mission work that his organization was leading and doing. And at the end of a long day, he went to a nice restaurant in Port-au-Prince and sat down and was offered a nice dinner. And he realized as he's about to eat this nice dinner, there are 4 little faces pressed against the window right over here. 4 little street kids. And the waiter's going, "Oh, don't let that bother you, sir," and he reaches to pull the shade. And Tony Campolo says, No. We can't pull the shade on them." And that's what Jesus is saying to these people in this room. Find your place, know who you are, know whose you are, and don't be pulling the shade. Keep your eyes open and your blinds up and look at what's out there. Pay attention to what needs to be done. The next time Jesus is at a dinner party in Luke, we are told that he is sitting down with tax collectors and sinners, his kind of people. And we know whose kind of people Jesus is with, and we know that in our own way, we are those people. The question is, can we remember that those people that we want to pull the blind on are also those people? The picture was taken in 1940 in Arizona, and the title of the picture is Children in a Democracy, taken by Dorothea Lange. Those people, those good people that we tend to not see, are still very much there. And in fact, as we gather on this Labor Day weekend, we are living in a society that is actually spreading even more who's up and who's down, which makes it a lot easier to pull the blind because you're so far apart you can't see. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not how it rolls. That is not the best choice. See, the thing is, this man who is always going to other people's places and being hosted at someone else's table, when we finally see Jesus hosting, it's at a borrowed table in a borrowed upper room. And at that meal he is hosting, he's offering himself and an invitation to those around him then and to us now. An invitation that we can never repay. We can begin to repay what is on offer at that banquet. That's his point. We're all in this. Keep your blinds up, keep your eyes open. Because when we dare to gather at Jesus' table, we're actively protesting against the culture of upward mobility and competitiveness of this world that surrounds us. And there's nothing particularly easy about that. It requires hard work. It requires a lifetime of growing. But to eat and drink with God is to live in tension with the pecking orders that we're used to that define our boardrooms, our college admission committees, our church politics a lot of time, our presidential elections, and it gets so tiring. And it takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of invoking the power of the Holy Spirit. But that's what we're called to do, to humble ourselves, place our hope in a radically different kingdom that has come near, and yet we're not there. I want to read a slightly modified version of the parable that Jesus told. She entered the party like a caped queen, her heels lifting herself up to thinner air, almost to where she wanted to be. She saw the table spread with boutique finery, charcuterie and artisanal cheeses, and duck liver pâté, red and white and bubbling wine for every course. She approached the gathering and saw on the far end the out-of-fashioned, rough-handed, and wrong-spoken, the servants and migrants who picked the butter lettuce. On the near end, she saw well-labeled suits, handbags with leather and metal clasps, and a look of confidence in the eyes of those bearing them. She saw one chair near her with those of her kind. She sat and mingled and sipped wine and laughed controllably and knew which fork to use for the appetizer. The host came and thanked her for taking the seat at this end and assured her in a warm voice that someday she too could join him at the other end. I'd like to tell you who wrote that, but I can't remember who I stole it from. And It's been a while. But that's the point. Jesus asks us to believe that our behavior at the table matters. Because he does. Where we sit speaks volumes. And the people whom we choose to welcome reveal the stuff of our souls. Favor the ones you cannot repay. Prefer the poor. Choose obscurity. This is God's world we live in, and nothing here is ordinary. In the realm of God, the ragged strangers on our doorsteps are the angels. Amen.